Red Ice Radio. From the visible to the obscure. RedIceCreations.com.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year wherever you are on the planet as we are coming towards the end of the year. You're listening to Red Ice Radio. Thank you very much for tuning in today. My name is Henrik Palmgren. We are coming to you from Sweden in Scandinavia. RedIceCreations.com, that's our website, a lighthouse of inquisitiveness in these dark times and a guiding light that hopefully will aid you in the search for authenticity. We have a very important program for you today with Janice Barcelo, who is with us to discuss hospital birth trauma, mutilations of babies, and the satanic elite protocol of hospital births. As you know, it all starts with the little ones, and here is where we can begin to break an abusive cycle. Janice is a birth doula and independent childbirth educator specializing in the prevention and healing of birth trauma. She is an international speaker, TV and radio show host, and founder of the forthcoming Birth of a New Earth preparatory school for conscious procreation. Janice has been an independent childbirth educator for the past 7 years, offering educational seminars and teacher trainings. And we are going to discuss the disturbing aspects of standard baby delivery protocols and procedures within the hospital. Many unnecessary and insane procedures are now commonly accepted as being part of a normal, standard hospital birth process. Stay tuned for much more. Welcome to Red Ice Radio, Janice Barcelo. It's good to have you here. Thank you for taking the time talking with us here today.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
You bet. This is going to be an interesting program, an important one, as usual. We try to cover both of these areas, of course, but this is a topic we haven't covered in detail in the past. Maybe it's come up in passing, if you will, but as we shall see, there is a lot to it, and we have a lot to discuss. So why don't we set the stage a little bit here, though? Since you're new, to the program, maybe we just briefly can cover some of the background, and maybe you can tell us, obviously, why, and then also when you started your website. You have a blog as well, but your main website is birthofannewearth.com, and then we have your blog, birthofannewearth.blogspot.com. Tell us about that, Janice.
Well, I started my website about 4 years ago, I guess it was, and it started after my own personal journey giving birth to children and the difficulties that I've had as a result of hospital birth and the violence that I experienced during hospital birth. From my experience, I began to study birth trauma and to understand how trauma affects the mind, how trauma affects the human capacity to experience love, and how trauma affects our capacity to have a joyful, healthy life. And the literature and the information about birth trauma took me into information about trauma-based mind control, which is what the United States government has been up to for several decades, and probably governments worldwide are also trying to understand how to control human beings and control the world. So when I began to study trauma-based mind control, I also began to see that hospital birth protocols were mirroring the techniques that were being used in trauma-based mind control. And over the course of the last 4 years, I've also been awakening to things like vaccines, the dangers of vaccines, and the dangers of chemtrails, and genetically modified foods, and fluoride in our drinking water, and pharmaceutical drugs, and the toxins in our cleaning products, and in our skincare products, and our perfumes, and our shampoos, and the nuclear radiation that's pouring into our environment. And I began to see a very dark picture of what especially the United States government is really up to, and how it is, my perception is that it is really trying to genetically mutate human beings and turn us into very obedient, robotic-like entities without access to our emotions, because our emotions are part of what enables us to communicate with the divine mind. If we pay attention to the sensations in our bodies, it gives us a tremendous amount of information, and if we're forced to cut off our connection with our sensations because we're so overwhelmed with trauma and, things like loud sounds, things that would disrupt our nervous system. We have to shut a piece of ourselves off. This makes it easier for them to control us because we're not able to access the communication with creation. So what I'm saying is that we are being conditioned to be in service to the elite. There's a few elite families that really want to control the world, that are controlling most of the world's governments right now, and that are deliberately trying to genetically modify the human species.
And there isn't just the one thing, as you mentioned, obviously, Denise. We have a big list of many, many different issues that are detrimental. But what I find interesting about your work is that you're watching this from the point of view of birthing and children, of course, because it all starts, if not in that first year, definitely the first couple of years that we have. And the question is how, from our perspective, I think we've forgotten how it is to experience. I know I certainly have. I have heard some other people who have memories going far back into the earlier, if not even their first year. I don't have that, and I suspect that might be because certain things have been, the trauma that was associated with hospital births or what have you, which caused the memory to shut down. We know that this is part of the compartmentalization that happens during a kind of a mind control event. In that sense, the trauma associated with that. But what do you think is the comparison? How do you think that a child that's just been born basically perceives the world? It's very difficult from our point of view to know what that is, isn't it?
Well, what we can know from our own instinctual understanding of creation is that the baby is coming in with an incredible amount of sensitivity and vulnerability. It's got it's at the most heightened sense of awareness when it is traveling between one dimension into the next, and it is at the most sensitive part and tender part of its life experience. And we know that although that baby doesn't have memories in terms of the way we think of memories, so for example, it's not going to have memories in terms of pictures or words because it doesn't have language yet, it does have memory through sensation, and so all of the sensations that it is experiencing will be processed through its nervous system and through its reptilian brain. And trauma is actually in the nervous system. It's not specifically in the event, but it gets held in the nervous system. And if our nervous system is overactivated or severely traumatized, which 99% of us have been, then the higher parts of our brain cannot function properly. I don't know if I'm explaining that quite well.
Yeah,
but
no, for sure.
Yeah, the reptilian brain is the part of our brain that controls our breathing, it controls our blood pressure, it controls our pulse rate, it controls us going to the bathroom, it controls all of those things that we don't have to pay attention to that make the human instrument function and move forward. And the reptilian brain is also very concerned about the survival of the human body, of the human instrument. That's its role. But above that, above the reptilian brain is the limbic system, which is the part of our brain that allows us to process emotions. It's the part of our brain that allows us to develop relationships and to nurture our young. And then there's another part of our brain called the cortex, which is the thinking part of our brain, the analytical part of our brain. That part of our brain would, if the reptilian brain was activated saying, we're in danger, if the cortex was functioning properly, it would analyze the situation to determine if there was a real threat. And it would prevent a violent outburst if a violent outburst was not necessary for our survival. But what's happening now, because the reptilian brain is such in a constant state of agitation and hypervigilance to threat, the rest of our brain, the part of our brain that allows us to have healthy, loving relationships, and the part of our brain that allows us to control our impulses, is not functioning properly. It's like underdeveloped, and we're just not aware that, the prefrontal cortex would actually allow us to perceive source consciousness, to perceive the intelligence behind creation. And right now it's completely stymied. It just can't function because the reptilian brain is so overactivated. And I do want to point out that part of the way the reptilian brain is kept in a constant state of threat is through the frequency control that we're experiencing. So there's a constant assault on our nervous system through the roar and the clamor of industrial machines and the harp frequencies that are blasting these low frequency sounds at us, that, we entrain our brains to these sounds that keep us alert, that like there's a constant threat. The cell phone towers that are going up all over the place. You can't go within 2 miles on Long Island right now without coming up to one of these horrific looking cell phone towers that are blasting frequencies at us that keep us in a constant state of agitation. So this is affecting our ability to decode reality, to understand how things really work, and to connect with the divine mind.
It's like that movie They Live, almost, in one sense. They, if you remember, ever saw that, Janice, it's like a frequency that we're kind of bathing in, if you will, that actually is preventing us from see who the real controllers are. It's a very good analogy. But this is, as you say, about a full spectrum assault, basically, on so many different fronts here. But
yes,
exactly. If we get back a little bit here to the beginning then, and talk a little bit about what happens to us in the early stages there. Let's say we have someone who's gone through a how should we put it, standard procedure birthing in a hospital. What kinds of effects does this have on us, and what is the regular routine? What would you criticize most, if we can touch upon some of those points?
Yes, let's do that. First, let's talk. I want to connect the techniques of trauma-based mind control and point out the things during hospital birth that are mirroring those. So the first one we really want to address in terms of the technique to control people's minds is to inflict physical pain and torture on, especially this starts in infancy. And when we look at hospital birth, we can see things, for example, they are screwing fetal heart monitors into the skulls of babies that are not yet out of the womb. Literally, they screw these things into the baby's head, and they're screwing them into the baby's head, into the soft spot of the baby's head. You know how babies have that very tender spot on the top of their head.
That's right.
And this spot, that tender part of the head is actually a part of the head that would allow us to decode information from source as we're making the transition into this dimension. But we are prevented from receiving that download because they're causing extreme pain in that particular part of our head. And we have to think of ourselves. You know, if somebody came up to you and decided to screw something into your skull, you would imagine that would be very painful, and you would want to get some sort of pain relief or Novocaine. They're not doing that for babies. They're just screwing it right into the baby's heads. They're also doing things like amniotomy, which is the breaking of the waters. The babies are in this beautiful protective sac of water as they emerge out of the womb, and that water is intended to protect them from the intensity of contractions. And so when that water is broken, and it's usually broken unnecessarily and much sooner than it would normally break, then the baby is going to experience the intensity of contractions without any sort of protection. So it gets very, very painful for the baby. On top of that, they're giving things like Pitocin, which will cause contractions to be much more intense and not give the contractions a rest. So with normal contractions in natural birth, without any drugs, you'll have a contraction and the intensity will last about 20 seconds. The contraction might last a minute, and then the body will rest. With Pitocin, the body does not rest. The contractions come one on top of another, extreme intensity, and causing, that's why women beg for epidurals, because the pain that's caused by the Pitocin contractions is so great. So imagine what the baby is experiencing as it's trying to make its way out of the womb when your uterus is turned into a trash compactor instead of a birth canal.
Wow. So what is their reasoning for using this? To make it go quicker then, or what's the reason?
Well, that is the reasoning, to make it go quicker, and I want everybody to sit back just for a second and say, why are we making things go faster?
Yeah. Exactly.
Why are we doing that? Shouldn't this birth process be allowed to take the time that it
it's safe to say that Walter Cronkite was not the most trusted man in America, and it's safe to say he was not even the most trusted man among newsmen.
Visit us online at www.canaryparty.com.